Good afternoon. Welcome to the new PARCC and DC Science Test Coordinator webinar. My name is Cassie Leinert. I'm an assessment specialist here at AUSSIE, and I'm going to be taking you through the basics of being the test coordinator for PARCC and DC Science in 2020. In the webinar, we do have the option of a chat box. Right now, all of the participants are muted, but you can certainly put any questions or comments into the chat box as we are presenting today. To begin, it would be great to get a sense of the LEAs that are represented. I see some new names and some familiar names. So if you can go to the chat box and just type in your name and the LEA that you're representing this year, that would be really helpful. So I have a sense of who's here and also can confirm that you're able to hear what I'm saying and participate when you use the chat box as you need to. The resources for today's training are available through the webinar. There's a couple different documents that you can look at in the handout section. They're also available online in a Google Doc folder where you can access them at a later date if that's helpful for you. Okay, I did see someone who typed some information into the question box. If we could use the chat box, that would be helpful. That's the one that is easiest to view for me while we're going through to make sure that I am able to answer your questions throughout the training. So if I could get some participants to just put their name and the LEA in the chat box, you can send it just to me as the or the entire audience, or you can send it to staff, which would just come to me. Right. See a few more people trickling in. I'm just going to wait 1 minute and then I will continue with the webinar. Thank you for your responses. Seems like some people are not able to access the chat box, so we can focus on the question box then. I'll keep an eye on both. All right, we're going to get started with the rest of the presentation. For those of you who just joined, my name is Cassie Leinert. I am an assessment specialist here at AUSSIE, and we're going to be covering the test coordinator role for the PARCC and DC Science assessment for this year. During today's training, we'll have an introduction to PARCC and DC Science. We'll talk through planning test administration, which will be the bulk of your work. We'll talk about what you're going to be doing while the test is administered, and also some closeout testing steps, and then some options for you and next steps for the future if you are interested in additional training or resources for working with these assessments. All right, we'll begin with an introduction to PARCC and DC Science. So PARCC is the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. It is administered in the District of Columbia annually and covers mathematics and English language arts Common Core state standards. And the DC Science assessment covers the next generation science standards. PARCC Mathematics and ELA are taken each spring in grades 3 through 8 and also in high school for specific courses. DC Science is only taken in grades 5 and 8 and is also taken in high school biology. Our participation policy is available to you if you've taken a chance to look at the slide set. You're certainly welcome to look at those in the handout section or also on the website at the beginning of the training. There's a link to our participation policy, which outlines a lot of detailed information, particularly for those of you who work with high school students and want to understand how their assessments should be assigned. PARCC and DC Science are managed through a system called Pearson Access Next. The system was recently opened and access was given to the person that we have on record as the LEA PARCC and DC Science Coordinator. So you may have received an email from me letting you know that you had an opportunity to log into that system. The students use a different system, which is also run through Pearson, to take the test, which is called TestNav 8. So the system that you'll be using when you're working and overseeing and administering information will be the Pearson Access Next system, but the thing the students will have on their computers is called TestNav 8, and we'll talk through how those work. As a reminder, many of you have probably already attended test security training, but OSSI requires each school to submit a test security plan. We do that in the QuickBase application. And the school test security plan gives us lots of important information about how you're going to administer the test and how you're going to handle test security. It's due to OSSI 15 business days prior to the first day of testing, so that usually falls 3 weeks before you begin testing. And you are not able to begin testing until we've approved your plan. Hopefully we approve your plan the first time we receive it. Sometimes we do have some questions. We may go back and forth and ask you for some additional information or some clarifications, but the plan must be approved before you begin testing. So do ensure that you're following up with that once you get into that 15-day window. Okay. Planning for test administration. The agenda for this section will talk through attending training, staff roles, registering students, setting up the technology you'll need for testing, creating a schedule, training your staff, creating test sessions in the system, and then documents for your test security plan. The first thing you want to make sure you do is attend a range of different trainings. Obviously you're here, so that's great. You're off to a good start, but there's another range of options available on our website if you'd like to attend additional trainings for PARCC and DC Science, or if you have not attended test security training yet, our last offering of that will be on February 3rd. It is required that if you are serving as the test coordinator for your LEA, for PARCC and DC Science, or for other assessments, that you must attend at least one of these trainings. So the last one's on February 3rd. Make sure that you're there for that if you haven't attended yet. If you have, you can look at the other options on this website and see what's available to you and what interests you. In the bulletin we recently released, I think a week or two ago, we outlined all the different PARCC and DC Science trainings available, so you can take a look at those descriptions and see if there's more support you would like. Some of them offer just kind of a workshop space where you can sit and do some of the work with the staff members from our team available to help you, setting up some of the files and the systems that we use in Pearson Access Next, and others are webinar trainings where we can provide additional information like we're doing today. All right. You're going to have a team of people who are working with you to support you and help out. You will be the LEA PARCC and DC Science Test Coordinator. You may have separate schools within your LEA. If so, you will have a school coordinator. If you only have one school, you may actually serve in both of these roles, and that is perfectly acceptable. You're going to want to work with a special education coordinator who can support you with making sure that students have their needs met in terms of their IEPs, 504 plans, and potentially their English learner plans. You'll also want a technology coordinator who can help you with the technology end of things. If either of these are areas of expertise for you, again, you're welcome to serve in multiple roles, but it is very helpful to have a partner in this and someone who can support with the tasks and also with expertise in areas that you may have less knowledge. On the bottom row, you'll see that you'll have many staff serving as test administrators. You may also have staff serving as proctors, and anyone else who's helping out entering the test security or the secure testing environment and working with any sort of testing or student resources would be just an authorized personnel. We cover each of these during test security training and the specifics of what they mean legally, but this is the structure that you'll be creating and planning out for your team once you attend that training and understand what each of these roles will be responsible for in terms of the assessment. All right, additional details are available on this slide. Things that everyone will be doing is ensuring that there's, secure testing environment for students, different roles and responsibilities in terms of preparing technology and working with student accommodations, as I mentioned before. And then the test administrators will be mostly managing each session of students in the classroom. Proctors will support them, and authorized personnel could be individuals who support in other ways. When you assign these staff roles, you're going to do it in two different ways. Sometimes this is a point of confusion, so we want to make sure that it's clear. You'll be doing this in the school test security plan, and you'll also be doing it in Pearson Access Next. There is a request in the school test security plan for this information, and some people feel like they've done it there, so when we ask them for it in Pearson Access Next, it gets a little confusing. You do need to put this in both of those locations. What it does in the school test security plan is it documents the information for OSSI. What it does in Pearson Access Next is it actually allows users to have roles where they can go into the system and do the things they need to do to administer the test. And it also allows us to have a documentation of which sessions they're working on within the system. So both of those places are where you will assign staff roles. Student registration. So now that you've handled the staff, you understand who's performing what role, the next thing you'll do is understand which students are taking the test and which test they are taking. OSSI will register students in grades 3 through 8 to take the PARCC assessment automatically. That has already been completed. We'll also register students in grades 5 and 8 for the DC Science assessment, which has already been completed. That information should be in the Pearson Access Next system, so if you've logged in already, you can download a copy of your registration file within there. If you have students who are in high school, you will do the registration for those students. We do not have the course enrollment information to make those decisions for you, and so we leave that at the discretion of the LEA to determine which test their students will take based on the participation policy. To do that registration, you will need a lot of information about those students. You'll need their unique student identifier, date of birth, a lot of different demographic information. You'll be entering that information in the system, and there's an entire guide which is available in the documents and handouts section of this webinar that can help you do that, and we've talked about a couple times in the bulletin. If you have students who are taking advanced math courses in grades 7 and 8, you will need to change their registration. A lot of schools have students who are in these courses. They will be automatically registered for 7th and 8th grade math. You can change that for those two particular grades. If students might be taking, say, an Algebra 1 class, you can move them to the Algebra 1 assessment rather than taking the 8th grade or 7th grade assessment so that they're aligned to the course that they're actually in. The registration information is uploaded into the system of Pearson Access Next through a spreadsheet. You're going to hear me use this term a lot, and you'll see it a lot as you read through the bulletin and other trainings in the near future. It is the student registration and personal needs profile. The student registration component includes what we talked about recently, where we have the student's information and the test they are taking. The personal needs profile is where we outline information for students and what sort of supports they may need through their IEP, 504, or EL plans, or also additional supports that may be offered to all students at the discretion of the school. We'll talk in more detail about what those are in the future. For the SRPMP, as I mentioned, you'll need your LEA, student name, demographic information, and then the SRPMP file can be found in the Pearson Access Next system. The way that works, which we'll talk about in our next webinar, which starts an hour from this one, is that the SRPMP is a giant file. It's a large Excel spreadsheet. It has all of your students' names in, usually twice or maybe 3 times if they're taking science, because for each test they take, ELA, math, and science, they have a registration row. It includes all of their information. You can download it, you can make changes, and then you can import it back into the system so that the system activates those changes for the student. Those changes may be registration, maybe updating a birth date if there was some sort of inaccuracy. It may also be putting in those personal needs profile information and giving that student an accommodation or an accessibility feature. Accommodations and accessibility features are identified for each individual student through that personal needs profile. Accommodations require students to have an IEP, a 504 plan, or an EL plan. Accessibility features can be assigned to any student based on the policies established by the LEA or school. There is a guide for a manual, I think, is how it's titled, for PARCC, and that outlines all of the accommodations and accessibility features available. And that information can help you determine which is which. You may think of something like extended time. Extended time is an accommodation. So you have to have an IEP, a 504, or an EL plan to receive extended time. Something like testing in a small group is an accessibility feature. So you don't need to have an IEP, 504, or EL plan. You may give that to a student who may have a particular need for it, just based on other features of how they performed in the classroom setting previously and what works best for that student. So those are the two different options. And in that P&P, you'll see each column has a title for each of these different options, and you can fill it out with a code that allows that student to activate either something that is based in the system, which provides them with tools and information through the computer, or something that is just given to them by the adults who are staffing this project, something like the extended time, or students who are in a specific setting or a small group. We do encourage you to work with a special education coordinator who has expertise in this area to create policies to assign these accommodations and accessibility features effectively. In terms of the accommodations, this is something students are legally required to have, and so we want to make sure that they get what they need and what is assigned, and that it all kind of lines up with the documents that are in place for them to describe those needs. For accessibility features, we want to make sure that the policies you create, because they are open to any student, really meet the needs of your students, that you're not over assigning things that are maybe a distraction or not helpful, and that you're not under assigning in particular ways. We want to make sure that your team is aware of the structure of how you would like to assign these, and make sure that students are receiving them in an equitable distribution. Students should practice using these accommodations and features. There's practice tests where they can do so on the website, and it allows them to kind of get a sense of how they function. Some of them have buttons they have to push, or they include highlighted information in the text that they're reading. So do give them a chance to practice using those so that they're familiar. Once the test begins, you can't answer questions about the functionality of the test or the content. So we want to make sure that they are comfortable with them before they begin testing. When you fill out this information in the SRP&P, Pearson takes this giant spreadsheet and applies that information to sending you testing materials. The SRP&P should be completed in February. The students' accommodations and changes that occur over time can still be accommodated for. You can place basically something called an additional order for materials if you have students who need additional materials that were not necessarily accounted for in your first completion of the P&P. And accessibility features do not require materials. So if you have updates and changes to accessibility features between the time the plan is due in February and the time you submit your school test security plan, that's all very flexible. We want to make sure that those are documented before students start testing and before your test security plan is submitted, so we can see what's in the system. But there are no additional orders needed for accessibility features. The materials will be shipped to your school, and that will begin in March. The materials will include manuals, accommodated test materials, and return shipping materials. The testing manuals are something that you'll certainly want to read, and you'll want to give out to some of your staff. They're allocated on a per student basis, so if you have I think every 20 students, you receive a manual for a staff member, and then you also receive a test coordinator manual, one copy that is for you as the person who is leading the process. Return shipping materials are something that you'll want to keep track of, because you'll need those to send back a lot of the information that you receive, particularly the accommodated testing materials. Now, the manuals are printed publicly, they're posted online. Return shipping materials are just labels from UPS and things like that. The accommodated testing materials are the area where we want to make sure that you are paying close attention to the arrival of this box, because those include content from the test potentially, student information, and we want to make sure that those are locked away and secure as soon as possible. OSSI will let you know in our NGA bulletin what week in March these materials will begin to arrive. We will also make sure, or you can also make sure that on that week, you let your front desk or whatever staff person may be responsible for distributing shipments know that it's coming so that it gets to you quickly and it gets locked away until you go through and start sorting materials out. And then you need to make sure you're locking away the secure materials, but you can keep a copy of the manual on your desk. So each school will receive the test coordinator manual. As I mentioned, the test administrator manuals come based on every 20 or so students. So you'll have multiple copies of those. If for any reason you need to have additional copies, that's often the case. You may have small groups of students and things. You can certainly print additional copies on the website. They were posted at the middle of January, so they are available now on the PARCC Pearson website. And they include both PARCC and DC Science. So feel free to print a copy of the manual or a section of the manual if that's helpful to you as you're going through the process of providing those materials for your staff. As I mentioned before, the Pearson Access Next system is used to manage the administration of the test. This is what the Pearson Access Next system looks like if you haven't seen it before. I would recommend logging in and making sure that you have access to it. The access was provided last week, so feel free to set up your password or your account if you haven't done so already, or change your password if you did have an account last year. It does expire, I think, after 90 days, so almost every year we would need to reset those. The system that students test in is called TestNav 8. And as I mentioned, this will need to be available to students on the devices they'll be using to take the test. So you'll want to download it as an application to each student device so that they have it available during testing. What this does is it locks down the student browser once they log into the test so that they're not able to access any outside information. Obviously, we would want to make sure that they're only focused on the test and not accessing anything through the internet or communicating in any way. So creating a download of the application really helps for students to just click that link, or for your tech coordinator to set it up in the morning and have students be ready to log in with ease when they get there for their testing session to begin. To support with loading content through kind of a computer-based assessment that pulls information from the internet, Pearson has a process called proctor caching. Proctor caching is available and has been for years. This year, Pearson informed us that it is not necessarily needed because the bandwidth that schools are working with tends to be getting better and better every single year, which is great for students and great for the performance of the system. If you do not fall into the category of the bandwidth that they expect, which is listed in the manual, you're welcome to use Proctor Cache. Even if you do fall into that category, you can use Proctor Cache. What it basically does is it stores information locally on one computer that kind of serves as a server to channel that information out to the student devices. Because the internet is moving so quickly now, with the bandwidth we have, that information can also be obtained without that local storage. But if you go through the process of Proctor Cache, you'll basically download the Proctor Cache information to one computer as your machine, and you'll go through a process of pre-caching, which is the action of downloading that to that computer. Directions are provided. There's some guides online as well, and Pearson support phone number, the number that they have to call for customer support, is available to talk you through that process if it's something you choose to do. Another thing that we do recommend, proctor caching is optional, but infrastructure trials are optional but highly recommended. This is an opportunity to kind of test that bandwidth, especially if you are shifting from a proctor cache setup to a non-proctor cache setup for this year. We want to make sure also that students have an opportunity to practice, that your devices have an opportunity to practice, that your teachers have an opportunity to practice. So setting up a session where you basically go through one unit of the assessment as an infrastructure trial allows everyone to kind of have an opportunity to get in the system, move things around, figure out what's working and what's not, set up some routines for students so that they have clear expectations of what testing will look like, and also answer students' questions. As I mentioned before, when students are actually in the system, we're not allowed to give them guidance on content, certainly, but also on the features of how to use the protractor or where the calculator might be for a calculator section of the test, how to highlight things on their ELA assessment. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity to give them access to the system so that they can ask those questions in advance, especially if they might be new students who are third graders who haven't taken it before. So an infrastructure trial is a great way to test out a lot of those different systems that you're planning to make sure that the technology works, that the students are familiar with it, and that the staff know the routines and the expectations. Students within your LEA may need support with technology that comes with their accommodation. So share these needs with your technology coordinator. Sometimes these are devices that get attached to a computer, sometimes they're separate. Make sure that that technology is also functioning properly, and if you're doing an infrastructure trial, have that student use that technology for it so we can get a sense of any sort of challenges that may be faced or any sort of improvements that need to be made before testing actually begins. All right. A lot of the planning is now complete, and it's time to create a schedule. The schedule is based off the testing time for each unit, which does vary across grade. So the table here provides you with some additional information, and it's also listed in the manual about each assessment and how long students will be taking it. For PARCC Mathematics, the timing ranges from 60 minutes at third grade per unit to 90 minutes in high school. There also are 4 units for some grades and 3 units for some of the upper grades for mathematics. So you wouldn't necessarily need all 4 sessions, you might need 3 sessions. Keep that in mind as you're planning for your different grades within your school. For ELA, almost all of the sessions have, or almost all the tests have 3 sessions, 3 units, except for ones that have something called a field test, which we'll talk about in a moment. Grade 6 and grade 10 in high school will be taking the field test for ELA this year, which is basically 1 additional unit. The DC Science Assessment has 4 units, and each of them are 45 minutes, so it's a shorter time, but there are 4 units for each, and you can plan accordingly how those fit into your schedule. Depending on your students, your schedule, and your school's choices, you can choose to do these as 1 unit per day. You can choose to do them as 2 units per day. Do be cautious about timing and make sure that you have ample time between units if needed, and certainly after units and around things like lunch, dismissal. You know, we can't have students continuing a test into the next day, and so we need to make sure it's completed within 1 day. But the schedule you'll create will be based on this information and how it best fits into the puzzle that is your school schedule. As I mentioned, the field test will occur for students who are in grades 6 and 10. The purpose of this is to continuously supply new items to the assessment. This is something that's done across all of the states that participate and many other states who are participating in their own version of an assessment. For PARCC Mathematics, the field test items are actually embedded as well as DC Science, so there's no change to the schedule for those. They're within the assessment. Students take them all equally. They're dispersed. It doesn't seem to have any sort of impact on the schedule. For PARCC ELA, because they are chunked kind of as these passages and these sets and these kind of big structured components as a unit, we do actually have an additional unit that's taken in 2 grades every year. And I apologize, this says for the 2018-19 administration, it should say for the 2019-20 administration, that will be grade 6 and grade 10. When you're creating your testing schedule, you're able to do it in a format that works best for you. The format that we provide is a spreadsheet, which gives us some quick information in a pretty easy to process way for us here at OSSE. But for your staff, you may want to create something that looks more like a calendar or has additional information that's relevant to your team. We will accept either, but we do need to make sure that if you create your own version, it includes the information that we need, which is listed here. We need the date, the time, the assessment, whether it's PARCC or DC Science, the subject, the grade or course, the session name, which will be something that you'll be creating in the system, and we can talk about that in a little bit, the name of the test administrator who will be giving the test, name of a proctor if you have one, and then the location where you'll actually be testing, so that when we come to monitor, we know that you'll be in room 304 giving a 4th grade assessment in ELA at 8 o'clock. All right, you have your staff set up, you know what their roles are, but they need to know what their role is. So one of the things that you'll be doing is training your staff, or your authorized personnel as we call them, for testing. The Office of Assessment trains you through things like this, as well as test security training. And then you would train your school test coordinators. Again, that may be yourself if you are serving in both roles. The school test coordinator usually works with the staff at the school to train them on all of these policies, test security-wise and also administration-wise. So they'll be working with their special education and technology coordinators. They may train them a little bit earlier. The test administrators and proctors, who are the bulk of the staff who will be supporting you, will usually have a specific training date. You'll list that in your school test security plan so OSSI knows that you've done it and when it is. You'll also have them sign in so we know that they attended. And that information will be when you share the schedule, you share their usernames and passwords for Pearson Access Next, you share test security information, you talk about accommodations and accessibility features for the students they're working with. All of that planning that you've done will go into the training that you provide to your staff so that they can be successful and perform the things that you need them to perform during the day of assessments. A good reminder for those staff is the role of all authorized personnel is to ensure a secure testing environment during test administration. So there's lots of steps and things that they'll be responsible for, but the big picture is to have a successful environment for students to test securely. The school test coordinators are responsible for training their staff. As I mentioned, they will go through policies and roles, test administrative procedures. They'll also have people sign in and give them a copy of what we call the test security notification statement. This is the legal side of things that tells each person who's participating what their legal responsibilities are, and they do need to receive this during the training. So make sure that you have plenty of copies on hand and that everyone gets one so that they're aware of the legal side of what they may need to do. All right. Students will be grouped into test sessions. These are created in the system, and what it does is it basically allows the person who's giving the test to the students, the test administrator, to click a button and start tests for everyone in their room, or stop tests for everyone in their room. It also allows them to view student progress and understand if a student may have an error where they had to exit the test, they may need to go and support them and get them logged back in. It's basically the management system that you're creating for each one of the test administrators on your team. It includes between 1 and maybe 25 students, depending on the size of the room that you're working with. You may have a small group where someone's just working with 1 student, so they would have a test session with 1. You may have an entire class where there's 25 students, so that person would have a test session with 25 students in it. It includes unit by unit, a way for the test administrator to set students up for success and create an opportunity for them to log into the test, and as I mentioned before, to close out the test when it's over. This is what the test sessions look like in the system. There's a progress bar that'll tell you if a student has exited or if there's an error. It'll also tell you if the students have completed the test. And as you can see in the picture in the upper right-hand side, there's a little lock and unlock bar. That's how you open the test so that students are able to log in. If it's not unlocked, nobody can log in. So there's some secure measures there that are used. What the students use to log in is their secure testing ticket. These sessions group students so that when you print their testing tickets, it prints them as a group, which is very helpful because you'll be setting up bins or folders or envelopes with sets of information that go to each person who is giving a test to students. And they want to have their group of testing tickets so they can give them out specifically to each individual student in their room who's taking the test. They are secure materials, so we want to make sure that once those are printed and you start organizing them, they remain locked away. They allow access to the test, and so we wouldn't want anyone to have those at a time that was improper or for the wrong person to have them. The test sessions are created in Pearson Access Next, and we use a naming convention. The naming convention helps us and helps you to have this information organized, and we check for this as we go through the school test security plans. The naming convention for the session name of the test session includes the subject, the grade, the initials of the person who is the test administrator, and at the end it has an R for a regular session and an M for a makeup session. Every session you create at the beginning is a regular session, so you don't need to worry about makeup sessions till after, when students may be grouped together for a makeup towards the end of your testing window. So all the sessions you create in the front end will end with that R. We also ask that you include test administrators, and we check for this with your school test security plan to make sure it's in the Pearson Access Next system. We have those listed by last name dot first name so that they end up becoming in alphabetical order based on last name for when we need to look any information up. If you submit your school test security plan and this information is incomplete or incorrect, we will ask you to go back and do it again, and we will not approve your plan until it's done. So getting this right on the front end will save you a whole lot of time. There is a workshop that we're offering where you can come in and get these sessions created and have help. So if it's something that is new to you and you would like support, feel free to join us for that session. All right. All these preparations were leading to your training of your staff, but they're also leading to your school test security plan where you're going to provide information to OSSE so that we know you're ready to test. The school test security plans include information on the school test coordinators, creating test security files, and school test security plans. The test security files are physical files, sometimes a binder if that's easier for you to store things. They're submitted to the LEA test or by the LEA test coordinator. They're submitted to the LEA test coordinator from the school coordinator, and then up the chain of command to OSSE. So similar to that training model we looked at, the information goes back up the other way where the school coordinator may complete portions of the plan, submit it to you as an LEA test coordinator. You would look at that and then submit it to OSSE. OSSE reviews the plan and provides revisions or approval. Each school is required to not only create the security file, but to also maintain it for 4 years. So make sure that you're updating it. There may be papers that you add to it during testing. If an incident happens, you put a copy of an incident report in there. If you have your test security affidavits that you gave out, you make sure that you have on file that list of people who signed in. So there's lots of information that goes into that file. If you're not sure, put it in the file just to be safe. We will ask for that file if we come to your school to monitor, to see what's happening on a day of testing. So we want to make sure that it's decently organized and that it's up to date wherever possible. As I mentioned, the school test security plans are submitted in QuickBase and have to be approved by OSSE prior to testing. We say this many, many times in lots of our trainings just to make sure you're clear that the school test security plans are submitted 15 business days prior to the first day of testing at your school. Here's a list of the things that the school test security plan may include. We cover these in our test security training. Again, if you haven't attended that, February 3rd will be the last chance for you to do so, and we'll go through in detail all of these components and why they're needed. All right, preparation is complete and it is time to administer the test. So let's talk about what your role and your other staff members, what their roles look like during test administration. The first thing we'll talk about is the setup of the classroom, then ensuring accommodation and accessibility features are provided, administering the test to students, and then documenting any issues or irregularities. As I mentioned before, the goal is for students to have a uniform and equitable statewide assessment program and a consistent and standardized testing environment. So one of the ways we do that across many schools in many different ways is by being really thoughtful about what is in the classroom. We have a picture here of a sample classroom. There's a lot of things on the walls or things about the way that this is set up that may be problematic for an equitable testing environment. We want to make sure that students don't have access to information that would support them in a way that other students are not provided with. So we don't want to have content on the walls. We don't want to have strategies on the walls. We want to make sure that students are separated clearly from their neighbors so they're not able to look at their neighbor's computer or notes or anything of that nature. So I'm going to show you another slide where we've kind of made some adjustments to this classroom to make it more equitable and more clear for students to just focus on their assessment. Some of the things that we would remove or shift would be separating students so that they're not right next to each other, a history timeline, animal life cycles, assessments where students received 100% and showing their work, formulas and equations, as well as steps for success. All of these would be things that you would not want to have available to students during testing. So you have two different options. You can cover them up or you can remove them. You can use dividers for students if they're sitting close by, or you can separate student desks. So consider each of the classrooms, talk to your staff about this, give them examples. Feel free to use these images if that's helpful from the slides that we've provided, so that they're really clear on what can and cannot be provided to students. In terms of the name of your school on the wall or the name of a classroom, that should be fine. Schedules for the day of what you're doing that don't include any sort of content information. And then we also have information on the board for PARCC and DC Science that is actually required, where you put up the unit name, start and stop time, and other information that is part of the manual for students to have access to during the test. Again, you can also remove this information, but usually because you'll be using it later in the school year or later in that day, people cover it up and then take those covers down. The information that's required in the test administrator manual for PARCC and DC Science is the unit name, the testing time, the start time, and the stopping time, so students can watch the clock. The assessment platform does not automatically remove a student from the session. When it's over, it does not have a timer. We felt that, as a consortium, the states decided early on that it could be problematic to have that kind of pressure of watching a little clock tick down. So students are given this information on the board so that they have access to it. And there's also a reminder in the script where 10 minutes before the assessment ends, the test administrator is required to give students a reminder that they have 10 minutes remaining. So here's a sample of a student desk. We're going to talk a little bit about things that students can and cannot have at their desk. And again, feel free to use these samples for your staff so that they can get a sense of what they should be seeing and shouldn't be seeing. Here, one of the main things that's problematic is a cell phone. Students are not able to have a cell phone, and staff, you're not able to have a cell phone. You as the test coordinator and your technology coordinator are the only ones who can, because they could be used to call Pearson if there's an issue where you need support with technology. They should be kept off and away, and students should have their phones collected when they come into the classroom. We wouldn't want them to have access to other devices where they can access the internet or communicate with other students. The other thing on this desk that you should not see during testing is a novel or a book. Students can have those after testing once they've handed in all of their devices and signed out, but they cannot have them during testing. All right. There are some materials here that you'll see on some students' desks, but not all, because they're for accommodations and accessibility features. Those include headphones, calculators, and a word-to-word dictionary. There are some students who may have these accommodations, but you shouldn't see them on a student's desk unless they have some sort of accommodation, or there's some sort of requirement for the assessment that they have them. I believe the ELA assessment usually requires students to have headphones because it can involve videos or audio. Optional materials. There are some things on this desk that are not necessarily required, but you may want to include them. That would be the divider in the background, a mint. Sometimes students like to give, or sometimes educators like to give students a little mint or something to have during the test, and then also a reference sheet. The reference sheets for the PARCC and DC Science assessments are built into the computer system, but you can have a printed copy of it if it's helpful. You do have to use the exact version provided on the website, but you're welcome to have students have that available if it's helpful for them. If not, they can access it through the system, and that's perfectly fine as well. Required materials. They will need their testing device, they will need scratch paper and a pencil, and they will need a student testing ticket. Those are the minimum requirements for students during testing. So you may see desks that look like this, or versions of what we looked at previously for different students, depending on how your school applies the policies and depending on what the students have in accommodations and accessibility features. Speaking of accommodations and accessibility features, we want to again just state how important it is that students receive the appropriate accommodations and accessibility features. Ensuring that students are provided with accommodations and appropriate materials is essential because they're entitled to receive those. Test administrators who are providing these accommodations should be trained and be aware of how to do so. Some of them may be as simple as plugging in headphones so that the student can have text-to-speech on their test. There's not a lot someone has to do for that. They just need to make sure the student has those headphones. They may be a student who receives Scribe, and the Scribe accommodation, I may be actually writing down or typing in a student's answers, and there's some really clear procedures and structures that I need to follow to make sure that that process is equitable and fair. So make sure that your special education coordinator works with your team to understand exactly what they can and cannot do during accommodations administration. As a reminder, if someone misadministers an accommodation, gives students something they shouldn't have, or doesn't give students something they should, it can result in the student test being invalidated, which is not helpful for anyone, and occasionally requires the student to retake a unit if you find out after the fact. So it's very, very helpful to do this beforehand and ensure that everything is provided to the student as it should be, so that we don't have to do any sort of backtracking or any sort of changes in schedule and testing for that particular student. One thing that's set up to help is the back of the manual has a list of codes that will show up in the system next to the student's name. This will be in Pearson Access Next for your test administrator to see and for you to see. And it'll show when a student has text-to-speech. It'll show when a student has a Spanish version of an assessment. Looking at those icons and just kind of knowing what they mean, looking at the back of the manual to double check, allows me as a test administrator to go into the process knowing that I've given the students what they need, or I know who in my room is receiving an accommodation or accessibility feature. So check out those codes and make sure that the right ones are available. If someone's supposed to receive text-to-speech and you don't see that code, it means the system is not properly set up to give it to them, and we want to make sure that the system is fixed before they start testing. When we administer the test to students, we want to make sure that everyone's following policies and guidance that's in the manual. Make sure that directions are read verbatim. There's no kind of ad-libbing or adding additional information. They are verbatim. The proctors should be actively moving around the room and monitoring students. Test administrators should not be looking at tested content. They can certainly look at students, but not the computer screens, and be looking at the problems or the questions they're being asked. That is not allowed. They may not coach students during testing, and that even comes down to something like asking students at the end of testing, oh, have you checked your work? Have you used your scratch paper? All of those things are a way of coaching students that is not permitted during testing. Also, policies for student breaks are outlined in the manual to let you know how to handle either a group break or an individual student break, and how those affect student testing time potentially. All of your coordinators should monitor and provide support during testing, so that's your role. You'll kind of be a central location for when people may need support with a technology issue, an accommodation issue, a student issue. If you have any irregularities, please document them. Again, there is authorization for the test and technology coordinator to have a cell phone so that they can call for support if needed, but those should be very rare instances, and otherwise those phones should remain off and in their pocket or somewhere where they're not necessarily visible to students and others who are around. Issues and irregularities should be documented and reported to AUSSE. Make sure that your staff know that anyone can report to AUSSE. A lot of staff report up the chain of command, and that is perfectly fine, but we want to let them know that they also have the right to reach out to us if they see something that concerns them. We certainly take all of that very seriously, so they have the option to fill out a form on our website. Anyone can do so, so please make sure that they're aware of that information in case they are not necessarily comfortable sharing something directly, maybe because of who it impacts, or whatever reason. We want to make sure that they have a direct line to AUSSE if they would like to share anything with us. AUSSE does visit schools during testing. We monitor to make sure that things are functioning the way they should. These are unannounced visits, and they happen at different schools and different times. So just be prepared that if someone shows up before you start testing, you can take them through your process, allow them to observe. Their focus is to observe and take notes for us. They are not there to give you feedback. They are not there to provide guidance or answer questions. So just kind of let them go about their work. If they have questions for you, do answer them. If they ask you to show them things, please take the time to do so. But most of the time, they'll just be observing students and moving quietly from room to room to get a sense of what's happening at your school. When students are finished with the test, there's a couple different options. They're certainly welcome to read. They can draw or color. They can also write or use a worksheet. We would like the worksheets to not be involved with the work that they were just doing. So if it's an algebra test, we're not going to do an algebra worksheet right after, but they're certainly welcome to do something like a crossword puzzle after the algebra assessment. All right, so that takes us through the actual process of the students testing. Let's talk about what happens at the end when you're closing things out. Let's talk about closing out tests. materials and what we shred, recycle, and return, and then submitting documentation to OSSI. Closing out the test in the system is pretty simple in Pearson Access Next. At the end of the test window, the sessions just get stopped. There's a stop button that you'll hit, and you can do that whenever all of the students in a session have completed their work. Secure materials need to be shredded or returned to Pearson. Non-secure materials can be recycled. So as I mentioned, the manuals are published on the internet. They are not secure. The information in them is public. Those can go in the recycling bin. Reference sheets, also published on the internet. Rulers, simple tool that everyone uses, nothing secure there. So those things can be recycled. Secure materials that need to be shredded. This is something that is not tracked by Pearson, but has information on it that we don't want to be out in public. So that would be a student testing ticket, scratch paper that students used. They have their work on it and show things about the problems that they completed. And also the math reference sheets if the students write on them like scratch paper, which happens. You give the student the paper, they may write all over it. If they do have any writing on it, then it should be shredded instead of recycled. There are a lot of materials that need to be returned to Pearson. They have tracking labels on them and they track each individual thing they send you. So if you send them back 5 things and they gave you 7, they're going to ask me to talk to you about those 2 things and making sure that they get those back. These include the really secure information like the test booklets, answer sheets, and human reader scripts that have content from the assessment. Anything that has that much information about what is actually on the assessment, we want to keep extremely secure. Each of these materials that gets returned does have a label like you see in the lower right here that says secure material shipped to Pearson. So if you're not sure if something goes back, check for that label, and you can certainly call them and ask them if you're uncertain as well. Directions for shipping the materials will be outlined in the manual. The deadline for scorable materials, which are those answer sheets, is May 22nd, and the deadline for non-scorable materials is May 29th, which might be those human reader scripts or those test booklets. All right, documentation for OSSI. You'll be completing that school test security file, making sure that everything is in order. Again, maintaining that for 4 years. And then you'll also be returning a test security affidavit, which is signed by the school and LEA test coordinator. It basically is a document. It's available now if you'd like to look at it on our website. That lets us know that you are providing us with any information that you believe is a problem, which would have been those incident reports where you've already reported it to us, and that you did your best to ensure test security. There's some legal language on there, and we'll cover that at the test security training if you haven't been to it already. Investigations. Occasionally, schools are investigated based on incidents that happen or results and things that we may need to kind of get a better sense of. Those investigations are managed by our office. They do happen in the fall and the winter, so not something to worry about now, but just something to keep in mind if we want to get more information about a particular situation. There may be an investigation that would happen at a later date. All right, next steps. Attending additional training. As I mentioned, there's a lot of options here. So if you feel like you've learned some things today, but you'd like to learn a lot more, you'd like to work with our team to help work on some of these files that you need to upload or things that you need to do in the system, please feel free to register for additional trainings. This is a list of the PARCC and DC Science specific trainings that we have coming up. So those workshops are the ones where you're going to be sitting with us and actually working on the process. The webinars that come after go all the way through May, where we would talk about the closeout. We talked about closeout today, but we're months and months ahead of May 14th. And so at May 14th, we can give you those reminders about what you shred and what you send back and how all of that works. Resources are available. Here's a list of information. Again, if you download these slides and save them from this webinar or from our website, you're welcome to click on these links, look at the training modules, Pearson Access Next system, Pearson support webpage, and also our OSSI website, which has information about DC Science. There's also the PARCC customer support line for DC Science as well, same number, the OSSI support hotline, and the OSSI support tool, which is a quick-based system where you can ask questions and send us secure information. Here's a list of our staff members who work on the assessments. My name is listed there, Cassie Lynett, and all of our emails are our first name, last name @dc.gov. So if you do have questions throughout testing, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help you or direct you to the person who can do the best job with the question that you have. All right, I'm going to check in on the question box. I know there were some people who used that at the beginning. I have not seen many questions pop up, but if you do have a question that you would like me to take a look at and share with the team, please feel free to put that in the question box now. We do have another training coming up in about 5 minutes. I do believe you'll need to log in separately for that. So if you're going to be interested in learning more about that Pearson Access Next system, please feel free to log into that webinar, and I will join you there in a few moments. I see a few questions, so I'm going to answer those. Again, feel free to stay on for those or transition to the next webinar or off to the rest of your day if you need to. So someone was asking about the content of the units and maybe how many questions are in each one. We do not specify the number of questions in most units. You can look at the assessment blueprints, and that'll give you a sense of the structure, but it does vary from assessment to assessment based on the content and based on that particular unit. So there's no specification of specifically how many questions there will be, but the time frames that we listed are available so you know how much time students will receive. There was also a question about downloading the slides. So there are handouts for this webinar. There's like a handout section. I'm not sure if it's something you can see right away where your question box is. It is on my section of the page. There's also a website which I will go back to. It is at the beginning of our slides, and it will allow me to zoom back here way up to the beginning. It is a Google folder that we have listed right here that allows you to access all of the resources that we talked about today. Any additional questions? All right, I hope this was a helpful introduction. There will be a recording, so if there is anyone on your team who missed it, we will post that recording to our website soon, and they can certainly listen in the future. And we will meet you at the Pearson Access Next 101 webinar in just a few moments. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.